warm welcome to Jennifer and Keith.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning. So we thought we'd begin with a David Whyte poem, too.
Why not? Nobody's done it, don't we? Somebody has to start there.
This poem is called Mamin. Be infinitesimal under that sky, a creature even the sailing hawk misses, a wraith among the rocks where the mist parts slowly. Recall the way mere mortals are overwhelmed by circumstance, how great reputations dissolve with infirmity, and how you, in particular, live a hair's breadth from losing everyone you have dear. Then look back down the path as if seeing your past, and then south over the hazy blue coast as if present to a wide future. Remember the way you are all possibilities you can see, and how you live best as an appreciator of horizons, whether you reach them or not. Admit that once you have got up from your chair and opened the door, once you have walked out into the clean air toward that edge and taken the path up high beyond the ordinary, you have become the privileged and the pilgrim, the one who will tell the story and the one coming back from the mountain who helped to make it.
Welcome. We are privileged to be here. We are pilgrims in our own way, and I welcome you as privileged folks as part of this community, whether you're new to this community or if you've been involved in this work for many, many years. And congratulate you for the pilgrimages that you have been on and the learning that you've been doing and the ways that you've been pushing out to the edges of this understanding. Thank you to Roma for that introduction, and thank you to the Leadership Circle people for the work that you've done in terms of giving us a model and a tool and a framework that we find so powerful. We want to start here in Australia, swimming upstream, and ask you, when in recent times, think of a time when you felt overwhelmed by circumstance, in David Whyte's words, right? When there seemed to be no right answer at all in that situation. And then, what was that like? How did you navigate those waters? So think about that situation and find somebody nearby you can talk to. You're going to have to, those on the wings might be clumped together. And we'll just take a minute or so each to tell each other about that. It's going to be interactive.
You might introduce yourselves to each other. Early.
Okay, we'll just draw that to a close. As the cone of silence descends again.
Okay, so we're going to do this again and again, ask you a juicy question, and then cut off your conversation in its full flower.
It's the only time we ever really get to experience power, you know. It's us facilitators, we're so limited, really.
We're trying to seed fantastic morning tea conversations. So hold on to those. But we'd love to know something like, what was it like for you? What was it like for you when you... First of all, how many of you could think of an experience recently where you were overwhelmed by circumstance and you didn't know what to do? Yeah, like, welcome to the human race these days, right? This is happening more and more. And what was it like? I'd love to hear, how was that for you? I know you were just saying stuff to each other.
Very
Yes.
easy to feel ungrounded.
Yeah. Disconnected, sort of at sea somehow. Yeah. What else? How about somebody from... Yes, ma'am, thank you. Yeah, murky water. Do you know, when I was a little girl, the first, you know how you have those little toys that are your special things? Well, I lived in the US, and somebody brought me home a platypus from Australia. So it was my special toy, the platypus. And it wasn't until I came to Sydney for the first time and I saw a platypus, admittedly in captivity. And the thing I didn't know about them is that they feed underwater with their eyes closed. Now that's quite a design, isn't it? They can't keep their eyes open underwater. And I kind of feel like that's us.
And as a consequence, they ingest an awful lot of mud.
And they're bumping into stuff all the time, feeling, I'm sure, ungrounded. They're both very graceful underwater, and also they're feeling their way forward. How did you go about navigating those waters? What did you do when you didn't know what to do? Anybody game to share? Thank you. Yeah, so instead of having your eye on a far distant horizon, you found something closer that you could move towards and begin to get your ground again.
Taking the first step, and the first step, and not thinking the second and the third, in David White's terms.
Yeah.
I think to continue the platypus metaphor was suddenly realising that I was in that flood and turned all the eyes shut and I just had to get out and
Yeah.
the reactive flow just recognise what was going on.
Yeah, it is funny that first sense is just noticing we're there and stopping paddling so hard and slowing down and just being. And then we can make a plan, bask in the sun again. Yeah.
Reconnecting with others, I'm not alone.
Yeah. Yes, that connection, that sense. And as we've seen right here, we're not alone in that space, right? There's plenty of company there. Perhaps too much company sometimes. But this space where we can not think, this is so unusual and I've done something bad to get here, but actually I can be connected to people and I can be in relationships, and that can help me through. So we're going to have a play with some of these ideas about being overwhelmed by circumstance and a kind of a way to move through that.
And we are, to again pick up another phrase of David White's, we are seeking out horizons. We are trying to sort of look out to horizons, but often we don't really know the kind of horizon that's coming at us. Often we get a really clear sight on the horizon. Often it seems quite straightforward. Other times it's perplexing. Other times it's totally shrouded in mist. And so there are a number of writers who've looked at different ways of approaching complexity, different ways of thinking about the circumstances that leaders face. One that we really like the work of is David Snowden. Many of you may be aware of his work at cognitiveedge.com. David Snowden, the developer of this framework called the Cynefin framework. He's Welsh.
I'm curious, how many of you have played with the Cynefin framework before? That's a lot.
That's great. For those of you who haven't, we're just going to touch this quickly, because we find it's a really useful framing to help us as leaders and as humans to think, what's the nature of the situation I face? And so David Snowden makes this distinction between the predictable world where we can understand the relationship between cause and effect and the unpredictable world where we can't. And in the predictable world, he again breaks that down firstly into a domain that he calls simple or obvious, where it's obvious what needs to be done. This relationship between cause and effect is clear, a certain set of situations arise, and we know the kind of things that are required. We can use the standard operating procedures, we can follow best practice, there's a whole series of process improvements we can make. Enormous benefits can be gained by achieving that kind of ordering and simplification. But often, we don't know what that relationship between cause and effect is. However, we can work it out. We can apply expertise, we can bring researchers in, we can lawyers, accountants, whomever, and we can work on the problem and we can work out what's the nature of the issue here and what will be the right answer in terms of solutions and so forth. And we can then take that solution and we can apply it in other contexts. And so either we know what the relationship is between cause and effect in the simple domain, or we can move into the complicated domain and work out what that relationship is and then start to simplify things. Again, great benefits that our society, we live much longer, we live much easier lives than our grandparents and their parents as a consequence of enormous improvements in this area. And we've learnt our basic ways of leading from this world. And the complication that comes when we try and apply those known ways in the complex space.
Because there's lots of the world that isn't predictable, right? There's lots of the world that actually, just because something happened one way one time does not mean it's going to happen that way the next time you try it. How many of you have marched into a place having done something that worked really well last time? You know where I'm going, don't you? To find that this time it didn't go so well. Have you ever had that experience? So welcome to the unpredictable world. And Snowden talks about some parts of this unpredictable world are complex, right? And particularly what he means when he says complex is you can tell about the connection between cause and effect, but only afterwards. You can only tell afterwards why this thing happened. Why did your culture change work so brilliantly in that organization? You look back, you decide what the 6 core features were, and you feel great. And then you make a mistake.
Or you write the Harvard Business Review article.
Absolutely. Or $1 million. And the mistake is to believe that because those 6 things led so beautifully to this great outcome, that if you do those 6 things next time, you'll get the same beautiful outcome. And Snowden says that in the complex space, it's just not so. There are too many forces that interweave. Context is too important. And so you can't rely on that. And instead, you have to be experimental. You have to try and learn and try and learn and try and learn. And without that trying and learning, you're going to be relying on these tools from the complicated space. And our experience with ourselves and the leaders we work with is that those tools from the complicated space, when we rely on them in the complex space, one of 2 things, sometimes both of 2 things happen. First of all, they don't work. And second of all, we just keep trying to do them harder and harder. Roma was talking about, do we just work harder? Do we just get more people in the room to solve the problem? Do we just stay up later? Do we just go harder? And actually, the joy of understanding the rules in the complex space is you don't have to work harder. In fact, you can sometimes just work a lot easier and have have the solutions emerge as you go along. And so we play in this space, and we help leaders play in this space by thinking about the world in a new way, this new mind Roma was talking about. There is another domain here in the unpredictable space. And this isn't a place where people stay. Work doesn't kind of come and stay here. But it tips into, in a temporary way, chaos. How many of you have ever had that experience? And here, this is where there's no connection between cause and effect. You can't tell, if I do this, I have no idea what's going to happen next. If I do that, I got nothing, you know? And so in this space, we are just trying to work our way out, work our way back into safety in some way. And
get out of the stream and get back on the bank,
get back
as
on
you
the
said
bank,
before, you know.
warm up in the sun, and see if we can get out of this space.
And there's another sort of useful point that Snowden makes here. This is a framework, obviously. It's a model. The world is not like this at all. You know, there are these domains. They are much more porous. You move about between them. You're often in many of them at the same time. The dynamics of issues flow around. But he says there is a harder division between the simple space and the chaotic space. There is he draws it sometimes as a cliff or this wave to signify that as we simplify things, as we get more ordered, we get things more regulated, we feel more confident about them, we take our eyes off them as leaders, we let the system run on, sometimes those systems will tip over into chaos. Sometimes our well-ordered electricity systems will tip over into chaos, and there'll be a series of knock-on effects, and it's enormously difficult to recover. Or sometimes we discover that the things that have helped us, which show up in our reactive tendencies here in this leadership circle, like the things like my passive and complying behaviours that have served me so well for so many years, or Jennifer standing over there and driven, her controlling behaviours that have served her so well for so many years, and you'll see she is the one carrying the clicker. Those serve us really well, but over time, if we just rely on them, they tip over sometimes into chaos, and they get us into real trouble.
The other thing Snowden talks about is that most of the time we don't sit and think, I wonder if this situation is complicated or complex, and how shall I apply the appropriate tools to the situation? Right? Like, we don't have those thoughts. He says mostly we live in a place he calls disorder. And he draws it, it's small on this map, but it's home. And what he describes disorder as is that place when we don't know what to do, and so we just act the way we usually act. If we really love the simple space, then everything is a process to be figured out. We had a participant in one of our programs come up to us and explain to us, we were teaching deep listening as a way of understanding teamwork and building collaboration. And he came up and he said, this deep listening, that's fine. But if you just had the right process in place, you wouldn't really need to worry about it.
The problem with that role play, he said, was that person just hasn't learnt project management properly.
So when you love the simple space, everything kind of looks like you ought to use the right process and it'll all be sorted. When you love the complicated space, I'm a researcher. I love the idea that with enough time and enough money, I can figure it out. I love the idea that we could figure out everything we need to figure out, and then we would know the right answer. And I have done research projects where that was absolutely my goal, and it's only now I look back at it and I think, oh, you poor thing. Because you were going to paddle in that stream a long time with your eyes closed. There are very few people who actually have this natural space of complexity, but
politicians
often
intuitively actually are much more comfortable in that space.
They're going, they're testing, they're figuring out, how's this going to go, how's that going to go? They're reading the waves, and they're trying things out.
I was going to actually also, an example just occurred to me of the chaotic space, which is, for some of you, Some of you in the room are old enough to remember the assassination attempt on Ronald Reagan in Washington, D.C. when he was president. And he's carted off to hospital. And if you remember, Alexander Haig, as Secretary of State, rushes in and says, "I'm in charge here." There's that moment. Some people really like the chaotic space for the opportunity it gives them, to step up and say, "I'm in charge here. I can fix this up."
So we'd like you to think about your work. In what domains is your work lying? It's a model, it's not clean, but we're curious, directionally, where is your work? Is it heading in some kind of new direction? Is it a new place? Is it more one way than it used to be? And now that you have this handy-dandy set of squiggles, can you imagine a time in your history when you used the wrong approach according to this? And what happened? Now I'm going to give you remarkably little time to talk to your partner about that. So you should talk as quickly as possible. Oh, now it says 45.
Yep, you're on now. You're on. Okay.
I'm going to give you one more minute in these conversations. Okay, I'm going to ask you to finish up that part of your conversation. Okay, I'm curious. How many of you find your work sort of pooling into this simple domain? Couple?
Good, cool.
How about into the complicated domain? More? The complex domain? Yeah. And for how many of you is it moving more towards complexity? So is it directionally increasingly complex? Yeah.
And I'm curious about, would you put your clients in the same, for those of you who've got client relationships, would you put your clients in those same places, or would your clients as being different? Which way, put your hands up if you think your clients are in similar places to you, and in different ones? Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting. So, and have you, looking back on it, can you imagine that there have been some mismatches between your approach and the actual circumstances? Yeah.
Clients want a simple answer. They're nicely bounded, it's usually a complex problem.
Yeah.
Got it. So they want a simple answer. They want to know, they want you to have confidence that you can know exactly what to do next and that this will be the outcome, but unfortunately it's a complex question. Yeah, that's a bummer.
And many in the helping industries advertise their ability to simplify. You know, it just happens. I think at the moment SAP have a series of advertisements running about their ability to cut right through complexity, you know, and to simplify. And of course there are ways that I have a long association with Oxfam, and I do a lot of work in the aid and development field. And there's an enormous debate going on in the aid and development field between the demand, not by both government funders but also large private funders, to have results-based outcomes, and to be able to be really clear about the results, and to be able to then drive for those results and to justify it. And there are enormous gains to be made in many parts of the field in that area. And there are also places where it gets applied to, which is total nonsense. And so it's not to privilege that simple or complicated or complex, one of them is any better than the other. They're just more appropriate in different circumstances.
And the issue is that we don't tend to, our clients don't, and we also don't, tend to be able to know what to do next, right? We tend to use the tools that we're comfortable with, and we go for those. So we're going to play around together with how to avoid this as a problem.
For every complex problem, there's a simple solution that's elegant, easy to understand, and wrong. Actually, as Adele says here, why just one? I mean, there's probably half a dozen. Trish, my wife, often she'll ask me things and I'll have an answer for things. She calls that male answer syndrome. I think in the complex space, of course, we can't have the answer. There is no right answer. There are too many variables for there to be a right answer. So I tend to try and think, and this may be my reactive defensiveness, but I tend to try and think of it as human answer syndrome. You know, there is a way in which we put a lot of time into, and we're very quick to come up with a story, an answer, a way in which to explain all these things that are going on. And often we're just creating a story to make ourselves feel comfortable. We're creating a strategy to make ourselves feel comfortable, to feel like we've got some control in the situation. And yet, in the complex space, while it is the case that you cannot possibly predict what the outcome is, there are patterns. And simple interventions may lead to changes in those patterns. It's not that we can't do anything, but we're looking for different things and we're taking a different stance. And so to try and work in that complex space, which is what we're wanting to focus on, is we're not just wanting to cope with complexity. We're not just wanting to have this wall of change and confusion and circumstance come at us and be able to cope with it. What we're hoping to is that we can lean in and we can welcome complexity. Not as a couch surfer who's just come to stay and is going to, take over the Xbox for the next week or two to the children's distress, or perhaps as the in-laws who are going to take over the front room, But let's welcome complexity as a guest from whom we're going to learn things and with whom we're going to actually create things and build things together.
And to do that, Keith and I, when we set out to write this book that we've just come out with, we believed that there were going to be some parts of it that were about development. It's my field. And there were going to be some parts of it that were about complexity. It's his field. And that there were, it was so neat back at the beginning. Do you remember?
You write that bit, I'll write this
It was
bit.
going to be so beautiful. It was going to be so simple.
I just had to rewrite your outline. You had to rewrite my outline.
We rewrote each other's outlines for a long time.
It was ugly for quite a while.
And then we came to realize, some years in actually, we came to realize that they're the same thing. That actually dealing with complexity and really living in that space and being able to operate comfortably, to delight in it, required us to grow. It wasn't just a new set of tools we could offer or a new model that you could play with. You actually had to be in the world in a new way. And that complexity asks that of us. And if we can answer yes, then complexity becomes a land of opportunity. But if we answer no, then we live in that overwhelmed place with our eyes closed, eating mud at the bottom of the river. So we've come with these ideas. We don't have very long with you, so these are just the beginnings of ideas. But let's play around with some of the ways we think we have to be different in the complex space. We have to show up in different ways in the complex space in order to delight in it and to thrive. And the first thing we have to do is we have to think about the world in a new way. And we have to think about leadership in a new way. Alan Langer tells us that certainty is a cruel mindset. It hardens our minds against possibility. Certainty is a cruel mindset. Isn't that amazing? Because so often we want to be certain, like the thing that we wish for. When we asked you that question about the time when you were overwhelmed and you lost your way, wouldn't you have really liked to be certain? Like how many of you would have paid money? You know, I think about just peeling off $20 bills for somebody if I could just feel certain again. And yet she reminds us that certainty actually has a dark side, right? It hardens our minds against possibility. And generally, we look to leaders to be certain, and we look to leaders to know where we're going. Lead us into the future, which means I'd like you to predict the future, choose the best one, and show me the way. And in the complex space, it's impossible. It can't be done. Because the future is changing so quickly that if I were to predict the best future from my vantage point today, I would miss so many possibilities along the way that it's quite likely, and with markets shifting as quickly as they were, that my legs would be taken out from under me. We watch whole businesses, whole industries change, evolve, and disappear right now. If you have your eye on that one point that's going to take you to the future, you are at very real risk. And so the challenge is kind of paradoxical. For leaders, instead of thinking about the future we want to go to, the challenge is to think about the present, to really understand, this is the David White idea of take the first step.
Close in.
Close in. Look now. Look at what's happening right now. And try to understand what's happening right now, not from the way we want to understand it, not from the story we automatically have, but actually from scanning as widely as we can about right now, because the seeds of a better tomorrow are right there, and we just have to find them. And we don't know which ones they're going to be.
And the seeds of the better tomorrow are there, and also the ways that the system will stay as it always generally has been in the same pattern are also right there as well. You know, so it's in focusing on the present that we kind of understand the way the system self-organizes to come back to where it started from, to some degree. And we see this in organizational change initiatives all the time. Enormous energy goes in, and over time the organization comes back to where it was. And it's understanding how it is that this system in myself or in this group of people or in the organization is organizing to largely stay the same, that helps us to then think about how to change in complexity.
So some of the questions we find most helpful here for us as we're dealing with the things that make us uncertain, or we're dealing with a future that seems really unpredictable, and for our clients as they are, as all of our clients are right now, is a focus on stories, right? Instead of saying, where are we going? It's actually really hard to do this, by the way. Instead of saying, where are we going? What's the solution? That's what people want. And our language kind of falls over into that question. What's the solution? But to ask the question, what kind of stories are people telling right now? And to gather stories as a way to understand, as Keith says, what are the dynamics inside this thing that are making it go the way it goes? And then slightly harder, but just as important, is a question about what do people not talk about? Because actually, when we can pull our attention to what people don't talk about, there are fabulous seeds for a better tomorrow in those stories. And so I'd like you to pull into your mind right now something that's going on for you that you'd like to talk to your partner about, something complex that you'd like to sort of fiddle around and have a play with these questions. We're not going to give you enough time to, you're not going to solve anything, which wasn't the point anyway. But we encourage you to play with these questions, feel what they feel like as you're answering them, and then take them home with you and try them again and again.
And if you feel you have the solution to the other person's issue that they're talking about, we would encourage you to tell them about that over morning tea. But refrain from doing it now.
So talk to each other. Was that
Who's the woman in red?
Okay, I'm going to ask you to finish up this part of your conversation. See, that is what power feels like right there. So, what was it like how were these two questions for you? How did that, in this little tiny taster of those questions, did you have anything different happen in the conversation? Did it feel different in any way? I'll take anything. Thank you.
It's so hard not to jump to a solution. It's just impossible, you know.
I know, and that was in 4 minutes.
Yeah. And you had 3 at least.
I observed the energy field in the auditorium change.
Say a little bit more. You saw the energy field in the auditorium change.
Yeah. There's something really opening about the idea of telling stories. We were working with a group of public sector leaders who are trying to solve really massive health challenges. And we gave them questions like this, and it's a big bunch, and people were telling the stories. And when they came back in the audience participation portion of our conversation, some of them came back with kind of the regular things that you would expect to hear. Like, if we were successful, childhood obesity would decrease by 37%, which would be awesome, but nobody ever told a story like that. No kid ever went home and said, "Mom, I'm so happy because my obesity decreased by 37%, right? And other people said, if we were really successful, kids would have fewer sick days and they'd be more excited about their lives. If we were really successful, people would be saying, there's so much more fresh fruit in the market than there used to be. And people would be saying, I am so excited to go to my auntie's 90th birthday. And suddenly those stories, people started to feel those stories and the difference between trying to reduce obesity by 47% and trying to make it so somebody gets to go to his aunt's 90th birthday party. They really felt that difference, and it changes the energy in the room. I really think so. But of course, this is not the only thing. It's not just about different thinking, right? That's not the only change we're going to make. So we're going to play around with a different one.
We want to talk about engaging differently. And we do a lot of work, and as Jennifer mentioned, we in our work, a lot of what we do is in how leaders engage with other people and how they might listen differently to other people, right? And really listen to what's going on. What we call taking the longest walk in the world, walking over and looking at the world through somebody else's eyes, through somebody else's perspective, and how really hard to do that is. And often, initially, what we experience is the leaders will say, that they do it because it makes them come across as softer or more interested, or there's a kind of way they do it to connect socially with other people, right? A good listener is not only popular everywhere. And we're saying, that's lovely, but really, this is not about altruism. This is about you being a more effective leader because you can see a bigger view, because you bring in and are open to a wider range of perspectives. And as you lead teams, you enable those teams to share a wider range of perspectives, and you can see more of what's going on. And in the ways that we lead, right across the Cynefin framework, it really helps to be a better and more effective listener. In each of those domains, it really helps. And it's critical in complexity. And it's critical in complexity because we cannot know what the right answer is, because there are multiple possibilities and we're looking for the ways in which the patterns emerge, we need to be able to really hear all the voices in the room. And we need to not just hear them through our own way of making sense of it, but to really understand them from multiple perspectives. So listening to learn becomes a critical part of how we lead and how we engage differently. And the question that we'd like you to think about and talk to each other about and listen to each other about is, which people are you not listening to and learning from? And what keeps you from doing that?
We have a little shorthand. For those of you who think you're really good listeners, which I bet you are, we have a little shorthand if you're having a hard time finding what group of people you might not listen to. You think about whether there's anybody in your life you think of as kind of an idiot. Because it turns out, if you can think of somebody like that, and I bet you can, you're probably not listening to that person to learn from them anymore. So if you can't find anybody, you should look into the circle of people you might have written off.
We actually did this. We did this once with a group of judges, and they could not, like lots of us, they could not get there. I mean, it's really hard to do, because the room became crowded with vexatious litigants. And there was all these vexatious litigants who'd made their lives a misery, and they could not take their perspective. It was just not possible.
Talk to each other.
Okay, well, just take a... Look at that. I love that. Oh, that's fantastic. When I was a 12-year-old, we were in our little intermediate school in Blockhouse Bay in Auckland. We were streamed, and there was a couple of classes that were sort of for the two forms that were a higher level, and we, just because it was, I'm sure it was totally circumstantial, but we were in the classrooms that were slightly higher up. We were on on an elevated piece of ground, and one of my colleagues, a guy named Dennis Hitchcock, I remember once going out and saying, "Mine, all mine." Don't know what he's doing now, but how was that? How was it to think about the idiots, the vexatious litigants, the challengers, the morons, the ones you love but who stir you up, and what you might learn from them?
The ones who just feel wrong. You love them, but they're just wrong.
How can they think that? Every time we hear ourselves say, how can they think that? What a wonderful opportunity that is for us, eh? To try and imagine how they can think that. What came up for people?
How many of you were able to find somebody that you might want? No. How many of you were able to find somebody that you weren't listening to well enough? Yeah. It's remarkably easy, isn't it? And what keeps you from doing that? Yeah.
Yeah.
I found myself feeling
So you're able to kind of feel into their experience. That's wonderful. Yeah. It sort of opens up the possibilities, doesn't it? It's lovely. Yes, listening intently is exhausting. Yeah, yeah.
When they're challenging people, or when they challenge your ideas, because listening is exhausting in every case. But it's harder under what circumstances for you? When people are so stuck in their own story, it's hard for them to see out. It's kind of hard for you to get in.
And it's feeling like...
Yeah. And
They're
you
in
just
it,
watch them
yeah.
spin. You get in and you spin and spin and spin.
Yeah, and there's a kind of sucking as you worry that you're losing your ground and coming down into the vortex. Yeah.
There's another idea over there.
And
I think a lot of what gets in the way, not only for myself, but for others, is how attached we are to our own rightness.
Yeah, we might have to lay that down just a little bit, huh? We might believe that we'd have to let go of our certainty. We had a participants say, well, if you listen really hard, you might change your mind. You might.
As I mentioned Oxfam before, years ago in a particularly contentious Oxfam board meeting at the time that the Milan Kundera novel had been made into a movie, it occurred to me that about the unbearable rightness of being Oxfam.
Yeah. Conservatives are more likely to read a larger set of things that conflict with their views than liberals are. The research that amuses me is the research that says when you give a liberal a well-argued conservative piece and a well-argued liberal piece, then they'll say, yes, now I believe what I believed before, only more, because you've given me this really good piece, and then you've given me this crap piece with all these terrible arguments, and then you give those exact same pieces to a conservative, and the conservative says, yes, now I believe what I believed before, only harder, because you've given me this really well-reasoned conservative piece and this crap piece from the liberals. So it's so hard, isn't it? It's so hard to get out of our perspective and into another one. Yeah?
I think that one of the things that can stop us listening to some people is that they perhaps embody a shadow within us,
Yeah.
a deep fear within ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, the shadow.
Yeah, so there's the fear that we might have to give up something, and there's also a fear that we might have to come to terms with some part of ourselves that we just as soon not look at. Yeah. So this is this engage differently piece, and there's one more piece we'd like to play with here. And here the idea is we also, at the end of the day, have to do different things. The dangers of life are infinite. Among them are safety. In December, my family and I went to Europe, and we went to this ice skating rink, which is the largest outdoor ice skating rink in Europe. It's in Budapest. And I had cause to reflect again on my life as an ice skater. How many of you have been ice skaters? How many of you have ice skated before?
The Australian ice skating team, that's fantastic.
This is exciting.
That
You
goes
ask this
along with-
question at New Zealand, and people just look down and shuffle paper.
That goes alongside the Jamaican bobsleigh team, really.
So when I was really little, I lived in the northeast of the US, and we lived near an ice skating rink, and we went ice skating every weekend and some days after school. And as a little 4-year-old, I was wearing these ice skates, and I was making my way around the ice rink, and I was falling down and getting back up and falling down and getting back up, and I became one of those super cute little skating kids. They have super cute skating kids in Australia too. They have them in the Northeast. They have these super cute little skating kids. And so I became one of those, and then we moved. We moved to Washington, D.C., where people have better things to do than ice skate, and there are no ice skating rinks. There are some, but they're far away. And I stopped ice skating. And then I started again at 17 years old. I got a job at an ice skating rink, and I started again. I put on my skates, and I went around the rink again, and I was delighted to discover I could still stay up, and I could still go. But there's a big difference between practicing something when you're 4 or 5 and practicing something when you're 17. And at 4 or 5, I was daring and courageous. I took chances, and I got better. And at 17, Roma was describing how earlier in our lives, we kind of take our self-esteem from the outside world. That was me. And I was not going to fall down. And I became the most cautious skater in the world.
But cool. I'm sure you were really cool.
I was cool enough, actually, that I met my husband on that ice skating
See?
rink.
My point stands.
So some of these things work. But as I was skating around this ice skating rink in Budapest, I was watching my son, who's 14, but who has been sort of doggedly trying to learn to skate backwards. And I thought, we've got to skate backwards together, me and my boy. And so we skated backwards together, and I was so afraid to fall down. And so here is this question about how are you afraid to fall down? If we are going to live in this complex space, we have to be experimental. And if we are going to experiment, we have to fall down sometimes. It's what experimenting does. It's not an experiment if they all go well. So the question here is, how do we help ourselves and others reach for a more experimental way of being and also be patient and kind with one another when we fall down? How can we support ourselves and other people to do that? And we're curious, what are you doing now that supports you or those around you to try what Snowden calls a safe-to-fail experiment? So that if you fall down, you're not going to break anything, right? You're not going to get on the front page of the paper. It's going to be okay. What are you doing that supports people and yourself to do that? And what are you doing that gets in the way? Talk to each other. okay, I'm going to ask you to finish up that part of your conversation. That's awesome. That's awesome. It does feel kind of like magic. Okay, I would love to hear what are you doing that supports you or somebody else to be more experimental? This is the steal from your colleagues portion of our time together. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, having conversations about it. Because that different perspective pushes you. Fabulous. What else? Yeah.
I find if I'm playing with something at the moment, the person I'm working with, I have great respect for, so there's some safety for me in that. So creating, experimenting and playing, having some safety if you want to do it.
That's fabulous. So you choose kind of companions that help make it safe for you. Fabulous. Digby.
I just pick up that word playing, because I think if I frame it as playing with something, it makes it easier.
Yeah, if you think you're supposed to get it right, that's harder. But if you think of yourself as having a play, that's easier. Fabulous. Yes, Jim.
I think related to that, not letting identity get tied up in things.
We've talked to folks and we've found that one of the things that gets in the way the most is when we become fused, when our identity becomes fused with our success in that way. And so if you can pull those things apart.
If you can make your identity associated with playfulness and trying things out rather than it working, then you give yourself some space.
Yeah. What else? These are great ideas. Yeah. Fabulous. Yes, if you can, again, this is about, can you notice the present? Can you be curious about now, as opposed to having all of your energy on, does it come out the right way or the wrong way? The idea of these experiments is to make a difference, absolutely, but it's also to learn. The point is, are we learning? The ones who are learning, those are the ones that are going to keep up and be agile in this new world. Do we have one more? You see it.
Yep.
I think working with clients, helping them to really identify where the safe places are,
Yeah.
as we need to help them to experiment more.
Fabulous. So helping people understand. It's our experience also with our clients that often the idea of failure of any kind is terrifying. And so trying to figure out the boundaries like this, and then it can get like this, and then it can get just a little bit bigger, and test and test. Fantastic. So these are all great ideas. I'm sure you had other great ideas, and I strongly encourage you to keep up these conversations with one another over the breaks and long into the future. And we're going to close with just...
We thought we'd close with a couple of quotes, one from David and one from White. No, actually, that's... sorry. We thought we'd have... we'd choose a man and a woman, and because it's... we're a partnership. So you're going to start with the man.
So here, the organizational theorist Charles Handy tells us, we've learned that the past will be a poor guide to the future, and that we shall forever be dealing with unanticipated events. Given that scenario, organizations will need individuals who delight in the unknown. Handy doesn't say we need individuals who can tolerate or who don't throw up when they are faced with the unknown, who delight in the unknown.
And the poet Mary Oliver, a wonderful poet, says, mysteries, yes. Truly we live with mysteries too marvelous to be understood. How grass can be nourishing in the mouths of lambs. How rivers and stones are forever in allegiance with gravity, while we ourselves dream of rising. How two hands touch and the bonds will never be broken. How people come from delight or the scars of damage to the comfort of a poem. Let me keep my distance always from those who think they have the answers. Let me keep company always with those who say, look, and laugh in astonishment and bow their heads.